morning. Everybody hear me? We're on Colossians chapter 3. Hope all of you have had a good week and are ready to study the Word and worship God this morning. Last week, we were on number 10, and the question or statement was describe the faithful Christian home. And we talked about that. I thought about it some more as we're ready for this morning. Colossians 3:18 through 21 says, "Wives, submit yourselves unto your husbands as it is fit unto the Lord, in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, lest they be discouraged." It's the latter verse there that I wanted to say a thing or two about, and it's just observations that I've thought about through the week in regard to how important a proper Christian home is and a proper example is. Your children mimic what you do. If you don't believe me, hang around a 3-year-old for a little while, and you'll hear statements that you know where it came from because they repeat what they say. And Nora says so many things, it's debatable that she even understands what she's saying, but she heard somebody say it, and it kind of imprints in your mind just how important the example you set around your kids is. And that's something that I wanted to say a thing or two about, because he talks about provoking not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. The impact that we have on our kids by the way we conduct ourselves, by the things that we spend our time doing, by the things that we deem to be important, all have impact on them because they're watching what we do. And the things we say and the relationship that we have with our spouse, husband or wife, they see that too. And they hear what goes on in the discussions between the two, whether it be fighting, whether it be pleasantries, whatever that is, they are hearing all that. And when you look at some of the dysfunction that we have to deal with as a society today, a lot of times that happens because of the interaction between the parents, or the lack of interaction between parents where there wasn't another parent for them to mimic and to model. And so this is super critical. If you're parents with kids, this is something that you need to focus on. If you're not parents with kids, or maybe you're older, you still can have impact by the things you say and do. If all they hear you do is criticize everybody at church, they're going to do that too. And I know of kids that are not kids anymore. They're grown and got little kids of their own, but you get together with them, man, and all they do is criticize everything that goes on. And it's because that's what they heard growing up. And at least I can know on that one particular situation because I was witness to a lot of it. And so not provoking your children to wrath, you can certainly be too hard on them. That's what we were talking about last week as the bell rang. We can be so strict and so unforgiving and so tight that rebellion results as a result of that kind of behavior. And you got to live your life, and they got to live theirs. But you can also set terrible examples and impact them too. The confusion about who you are or what you are, a lot of that comes because the parents were idiots themselves. And that, you hear it. I heard Nora say just a couple weeks ago she is a dog. I told Kim, I said, we better run and get a dog pan and feed her that way. But there are parents that take that literally. And she's Elsa part of the time. Sometimes she's Gaga. And it's a little kid's mind. But the parent who would take that up and run with it, that's a serious, serious problem. And we've got to be good examples. We've got to be supportive in the right manner. And if we've got friends that feel that way, we need to try to talk them out of it, because we're in a mess as a society because parents have failed. And I'm not saying you failed, don't get me wrong, but parental failure is the reason there's so much goofed up stuff. And the Bible tells you how to do it. Yeah, yeah, we're responsible for that, and we can't get into our own selves that we fail to take into consideration. The most important thing we can do is save our family, and the formative years are from an article just recently that children as young as 1-2 months old understand things. And a lot of times adults get it in their head they're really not able to understand anything until they're old enough to reason. Right now, you can't really reason with Nora. She's not on the reasoning level. But she can repeat everything you say. And we've got to recognize there's a point in our lives where we've got to be taught the right things to do. And there doesn't have to be an explanation for it. I learn by knowing why I have to do something. I've always been that way. But I didn't learn that when I was little. I got whacked when I was little, and I understood that. And I made the right decisions a lot of times because I knew the consequences. And so they're learning when they're small, and we don't need to say, well, I've got time out till they're 5 or whatever. What was you going to say, Ken? Yeah. Well, a little kid like that's going to be something else 5 minutes later. But I certainly didn't intend to mean that. It doesn't mean make your children mad. What I'm talking about when he says provoke not your children to wrath, and it's what he means, is that we can be so restrictive and tight that rebellion results. And that's the wrath I think he's speaking of here. And all of us know personally. And any other comments? Wesley.
Mike, I had a gospel preacher want to have a heart-to-heart talk with me when the girls were small. He was very concerned about the way that Elf and I were rearing them, and thought we needed to be a lot rougher than what we were. Today, he don't have a child faithful out of the 4 he's got. We had 2 turn out real good. So don't let people get after you for your parenting skills if you know you're doing what's right.
Good point. When Beth was small, most of the time as Kim, I took her out a time or 2. But she had to be taken out and have an attitude adjustment, and we'd have people get on us for doing that. You're mean. And spare the rod and spoil the child is taught in Proverbs. That doesn't mean you're a whip cracker or something like that. But when you say something, it needs to mean something. I want you to stop that right now. And you hear that a dozen times. And the kid learns not to regard that. It doesn't mean anything. They have to be taught that what you say means something. And there are different ways to go about that, but that rod works pretty well. It did on me, and most of the rest of you. David. No.
But one of the most meaningful things, or just made my heart flutter, was when Caleb and Lizzie moved to Washington, D.C. This is the first time they've been out on their own, and they were truly responsible for themselves. And the first time we visited them, Caleb pulled me aside and he said, "Thank you for raising me the way that you did." He said, "I understand it now." And I remember telling him as he grew up, I said, "You're not going to get everything that you want." I said, "We're going to try to be reasonable but not give you everything you want." I said, "Part of our goal is to raise you to become a responsible human being, because you're going to be responsible for yourself." And it was just so gratifying to hear him say that. And I wondered, for a few to several years, did we do the right thing, or was this the right move? But it still go back to, we have to forgive ourselves sometimes that we're just not perfect. We make decisions that aren't the right ones, and that's only because this is our first time being a parent.
Yeah, and I certainly don't mean to imply that there are perfect parents, because I was not, and nor was Kim. But when you're teaching what's the right thing to do, Jesus was the perfect role model, and he was perfect. And so we all aspire there, and we're going to goof it up. David made a point there just as he closed. This was all new. Man, it was. It was difficult times, and I look back on us when we were a lot younger, and I don't know how we made it, honestly, in some respects. We're grandparents now and tend toward being a whole lot more lenient. I think there's a reason you get kids when you're young, so that you won't have that lenient approach. But anyway, I wanted to go back on and touch on that. So it's so important. It's the most important thing parents do, other than keep God first in their lives. And thanks for listening.
Mike, if we're not Ephesians 6:4, you may have lived, I wasn't here last week. It says, "Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." That's the way we're raising them. If we're raising them to be doctors and lawyers and whatever for their financial well-being, we're wasting our time. We better bring them up in the way of the Lord, and whatever decision they make, they'll put the Lord first in their lives, and that makes a big difference. I told my kids, I don't care if you work on the trash truck, what you do, you be faithful to God, and He'll take care of you.
Yeah, and we say that, but they see it in our lives as well.
That's right.
If they hear us using profanity and beer in the refrigerator and all the other things that people tend to do hypocritically, kids see that, man. They're not blind. And so they're watching us probably more than they're hearing us. And so if they see us have it first in our lives, then they're more likely to have it first in their lives too. Good point.
Mike, we need to show respect toward our children, though we discipline them. We don't need to be running them down, telling them how ignorant they are. And I don't know if a child as stupid as you are, and so forth. Now, Mom, you might think she's little, but she carried a big stick. And one thing she would not do is ever whip us in front of anyone. She showed us that much respect. But she'd say this, which destroyed our day. When you get home, you're going to get a whipping. And you know what? That's exactly what happened. It never changed. We appealed to the Supreme Court. Dad, we go to Dad and plead with him. Dad, talk to her. Please. Didn't do it good.
There was a bush beside the road on the way home from Mabel McQueen's who cut our hair when we was little, and we knew we was going to make a stop at that on our way back up walking. So I'll tell you this little story. I don't mean to tell stories, but Phil and I were out playing Army one time, and I won't get into the details of this, but some people came and I made a crude remark. More than crude is profane, but I was little. And we got in the house later on, and Phil got mad at me, and he said something profane. And Mom came in there and said, "You're going to get it." And he said, "Well, Mike said, but and you're going to get it too." And she waited till they left, and we dreaded it the whole time because we knew what was coming, and she didn't let up on the promise. She did it. And, you know, I spent the next 3 or 4 hours dreading what was to come, and I thought pretty hard about what I said. But it works. It really does. And you don't have to be brutal with it. You don't have to leave scars or anything like that, but there is reward and consequences. Every action has them. And if we don't reward or punish consequences, they'll learn there is none. And that's what our laws are doing to our country right now. If you're in the right group, you don't get punished. Paula?
We have this friend, and his mom was a little woman too. And she had a house full of kids. But if they done something, she'd say, "I'll get you before you go to sleep tonight." And she'd wait till they got in bed and got really comfortable, and she'd turn the covers off of them and whip them to sleep.
That's almost sadistic. Howard, how are you?
Howard, and you had mentioned something too, that, you know, we can say it, but they see us. And I remember when Angie was pregnant with Caleb, and when did they start learning? I think they learn our voices even in the wombs. You remember, if I start talking, there was a different excitement. He learned the dogs, and they're learning from us, our tone and everything. And the second thing is that I see it so much in the practice and other things. I've got quite a few fathers that will, well, when he gets older, he can start playing ball and all, and then we'll start doing things. And to me, I don't think it ever says stop being a dad. I think we need to get them from the beginning. And it may be tough to hold that child, or I can't hold babies, or this or that. And you'd be amazed how much I see that. I also got a dad that's from Michigan, and when he goes up there, he's like, "Well, they're young. I'm going to wait till they get in grade school." He didn't even want to go because he wants to wait till they get a certain age, and then he can start being a grandfather. And I just think that's a big mistake too.
Yeah. There was a Harry Chapin song about this very subject. And he talked about how his son wanted him to play ball and do all these things with him. He never had time for it. And as he got older and the son grew up, he wanted to spend time with his son. His son didn't have time for it. And that's a really good song along that line, Vicki.
I think too, Mike, you're talking about our children learning from us. They also learn our work ethic.
Yeah,
If we're lazy, and I know you'll probably get into that in the next little bit,
yeah.
they're gonna grow up and be the same way because they've not been taught to work and get out and do, and we've got a lazy society
Yeah.
nowadays.
I actually was not going to mention children in that, but I'm glad you did it now because that's a really good point. Children need to be taught to work. They need to be taught how to do things.
Our
Yeah.
society nowadays is sit in front of the TV and play video games
Yeah.
nonstop, and they don't know what it is to get out and play and work and.
There's a really good Vietnamese restaurant in Blanco, and we love to eat there, but it's not open half the time because they don't have any help. And what Vicki just said is one of the big reasons. The people that normally would work in restaurants and entrance level jobs don't want to. And they're enabled not.
And in that aspect too, mom and dad are not making them go out and get a job to support themselves either.
Right, right. Teaching responsibility is one of the things we teach. Number 11, how should we conduct ourselves with our employers? Colossians 3:22, servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. We're hired to do a job like I had. You're given 3 big fat manuals to learn, and they expect you to come to work work your hours, do your thing, and go home. Come back the next day and do it all again on time. And that's what they expect. If we don't approach our jobs with that attitude, what are we doing?
Not fulfilling our obligation.
We're not fulfilling our obligation to our employer. He's writing us a check, paying us so much an hour for the time that we're to work. If we don't do that, what are we doing to him? We're stealing. We sure are. There's all kinds of things that people do. First job I had after I got out of school was a plant, and it's in the stock room. I hated that job with passion. I wanted to get out just as fast as I could get out of it. But it was amazing what I saw people do. And anything they could to knock off time. They would find a place to hide and take a nap, all kinds of things. And I was taught better than that, and it bothered me. Not to mention the fact I just hated that job, counting light bulbs and doing stuff like that. But I tried to do it best I could, but I needed to get out of there fast. And I was brought up to work, and I've got a harder attitude about that probably than anything else. And so our attitude should be, we're going to give them their money's worth. We're going to do our best. What if we don't like them? Doesn't matter. If you can't go to work and be happy, find you a place that you can be happy. But do your best while you're there, because what the reputation you build as a worker follows you. And that's our obligation to them. It's also our obligation to God. He says when servants obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, that applies to the employee-employer relationship. And so we're not pleasing to God if we're sloughing off at work. And we need to recognize how important that is. And so if we're about serving God, we're going to do it to the best of our ability. And you need to like what you do. That way when you get up and go to work, you're not dreading it. But if you're in that situation for a little while, you need to figure out how to do it well while you're there. Ephesians 6:5-8, servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, and singleness of heart as unto Christ. Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. Of course, Ephesians is a little bit of a mirror book of Colossians, but Paul in Ephesians really opens that up a whole lot more. And when he says, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall receive the Lord, whether he be bond or free. They had to deal with slavery at this point in time because it was legal, and the Bible did not make a statement about slavery itself being evil, although treating your neighbor as yourself and putting God first takes care of that. And we're going to go to Philemon after this book, and we'll talk more about that then. But once you understood what Christianity had to say, there's no way you could view slavery as okay. And so he's speaking when he talks of servants, and we are not slaves to our employers, but we are servants because we're hired to do. And so our attitude needs to be one that I'm going to do this to serve God. If I can't do it, to serve the turkey that's over me. And we have to take on the right attitude there. 1 Timothy 6:1-2. Let as many servants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, that the name of God and his doctrine be not blasphemed. And they that have believing masters, let them not despise them, because they are brethren, but rather do them service, because they are faithful and beloved, partakers of the benefit. These things teach and exhort. The word teaches and exhorts to do the things that we're talking about here. And the attitude and the way we do our work, along with in front of our fellow employees, makes a statement about us and who we serve. And so it is an important attitude to develop. And I know everybody in here, I couldn't point to one of you that doesn't do this right. But we're teaching. Patsy.
You know, we're talking about doing our work and doing what we're supposed to, and showing a Christian attitude. It can be surprising how many times that keeps you in good graces where you work. Keeps you away from things that people get in trouble for. If they know that you have that stand, a Christian stand, then they're not going to try to involve you in that stuff because they know what your answer's going to be. And it will keep you from, I've been in that situation, and luckily, because they knew where I stood, they didn't pull me into it. And it meant a lot because I could have lost my job had I been pulled into it.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you let them know where you stand, if they know you're honest, if they know you're trying to do your best, you'll always do that, then they're not going to try to pull you away from that.
Yeah, it lessens the temptation.
I heard a manager one time talking to an employee, and he said, be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And there's a whole lot of truth in that, as simple as it sounds. And being part of that solution involves not just doing the work, but your attitude about the work, and coworkers who frustrate you, you know, not being really vocal about that and causing controversy. But that's one way to look at it that we often don't think about. You're either on one side or the other.
Well, it's a character statement, and characters aren't born with, they're made. And people develop an attitude on you based on what they observe. Not going to go into this long story, but a night after I graduated high school, I wound up helping a guy daub out tobacco on a hillside that was steep enough that you could not have to bend all the way over. You could just stand on the lower side of the row and reach down and put the plant in the ground. And it's hot, and I've been doing it a while, and I was tired, and I just stood up, stretched my back, and he come by and said, "We'll rest when we're dead." So, character building. Number 12. By the way, employers owe it to their employees to treat them with respect and integrity as well. We're going to get into that in number 12. Does the Bible endorse slavery? Huh?
Doesn't endorse it.
It doesn't endorse it. The Old Testament, there was slaves among the among the Jews. The Mosaic law talked about it. If you got in debt to someone, you could indenture yourself. Thank you. That would not pop right away. You could indenture yourself to someone to pay back that debt, and so that situation existed. But they were expected to treat each other with respect. So that was a theocracy. The Bible, the Old Testament, dealt with the Jews particularly and told them how to deal with everything. But as we move into New Testament times, Christianity is a way to live, but it's not the government. And so Christianity finds itself being administered in all kinds of situations. And in Rome, slavery was legal. We know from a study of the New Testament, you can't treat people the way slaves were treated and be a good Christian. And Paul deals with that in Philemon. But the Bible does not endorse slavery. It just speaks to a man where he is. And if I'm a man and I legally own slaves in this period of time, then there was a way I could do that and be within the law and within God's will as well by treating those people with the respect they deserved and being sure they had everything they needed. But that was dealing with the law at the time. We know from history there were slave owners in the South that treated their slaves this way, but a lot of them were brutal. And so no way God respected that or endorsed that. That was sinful. And
There's a movie on now that everybody needs to go see. Hollywood is banning it. It's not supposed to be shown. It's about slavery. And it's Sound of Freedom.
I think a lot of people in here have seen that.
Everybody needs to go see this movie.
We thought about going Friday night. Kim said she didn't want to cry. So.
It's really a good movie. And it's true.
Yeah.
Sadly, there are lots of examples where in the writings of first-person narratives from the days of antebellum and pre and post that talk about slavery in the South and how Scripture was often used as a justification to maintain that institution. And then there were also people of various faiths that contended just the opposite for that, and a lot of those people were persecuted out of the South that were trying to point out how slavery and Christianity just did not go hand in hand as far as the North was concerned.
How much false doctrine is supported by cherry-picked Scripture? I mean, that was wrong, and there's no way you can support what took place in a lot of instances. The people to whom the gospel is preached are the most of the time not in position to change those laws. And the people to whom Paul spoke, that was the case. They couldn't do anything about Roman law, but they had to live a Christian life within it. And so he teaches them where they were. A person who becomes a Christian in slavery still has a responsibility to the owner. I'm not going to get on that a lot, but that's what Paul told Onesimus. You need to go back to Philemon. He talks to Philemon as well about how Philemon ought to treat Onesimus when he gets back. And it's Paul's hope that he'll send Onesimus back to him to help him. And so that we'll talk about that in that letter. The way a person conducts himself from that time forward must be consistent with the way of Christianity. Christianity softens people's hearts, and slavery became much less prominent. I'd like to say there's no slavery in America, but what Ann just alluded to is slavery. Sex slaves, the United States is the second biggest customer for that. And it's the third biggest population, so you need to take that into consideration as well. I'm not making excuses because that's awful, and it needs to be rooted out, but it does go on. Philemon 10 through 17 says, I beseech thee for my son Onesimus, whom I have begotten in my bonds, which in time past was to thee unprofitable, but now profitable to thee and to me, whom I have sent again, but therefore receive him, that is, mine own bowels, whom I would have retained with me, that in thy stead he might have ministered unto me in the bonds of the gospel. But without thy mind would I do nothing, that thy benefit should not be as it were of necessity, but willingly. For perhaps he therefore departed for a season, that thou shouldst receive him forever, not now as a servant, but above a servant, a brother beloved, especially to me. But how much more unto thee, both in the flesh and in the Lord? If thou count me therefore a partner, receive him as myself. Is that not what we've been saying here about how we treat each other and how to deal with these things? Number 13, if we conduct our affairs heartily, how does that influence the world? What does heartily mean?
With good spirit.
With good spirit?
Sincerely.
Sincerely? What comes to my mind is eating. When I hear the word heartily. If you're a big eater, you eat heartily. You're excited about the next meal. And I've always said I relate everything to food, travel, or whatever, but when we do things heartily as to the Lord, not to men, that means we've got our whole heart in it. And so as we conduct ourselves and do the right things, our attitude shines to the people that watch us, whether they see negative or positive. And it is a bigger statement than we can ever teach. And so when he says to do things heartily as to the Lord, not to men, that bad job you've got that you wish you were out of, you still got to get that right attitude on and get through it because people are watching. Colossians 3:23, and whatsoever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men. That means that we've got a good Christian-like attitude. 2 Chronicles chapter 31, 20 through 21, and thus did Hezekiah throughout all Judah, and wrought that which was good and right and truth before the Lord his God. And in every work that he began in the service of the house of God, and in the law, and in the commandments to seek his God, he did it with all his heart and prospered. Now, Hezekiah was going to die, and he prayed to God that his life be extended. God extended it. He was a good king. David?
Jesus told us to be salt and light.
Salt and light.
I mean, this right here is the embodiment of it.
Yeah. We're going to talk about salt in chapter 4, but salt makes things palatable. Eddie?
A number of years ago, I had hired a technician, and he had been with me for about 2 weeks. And just out of the blue one day, he said, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" I said, "Well, yeah, why do you ask?" He said, "I've just been watching you, listening to you." He said, "It shows." And I thought that was a pretty good compliment.
That's a good compliment. Before we run out of time, Ecclesiastes 9:10. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with all thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest. So you're charged to push it hard and do it right. Got another minute. Matthew 6:33, along the same idea, but seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Howard made this comment a while ago about raising kids. If this is the first thing in our lives and this is what our kids see, they're more likely to come along. If this is the way we live our lives, as Eddie just pointed out, people are more likely to see it because they see what drives us, what pushes us, what makes us make the right decisions. And all these things involve doing our jobs heartily or whatever we do. Number 14, how does that attitude affect us?
It would help us cope better with whatever we face every day.
If we are around people that are like this, does it pick us up or get us down? It picks us up. If we are around people who are positive, who are charged, who are going at it hard, makes us want to get at it and go hard. If we are lazy, Vicki mentioned a while ago, and we kind of just beat through the day, we go home not charged up ourselves, but the people who hung around us all day are discouraged themselves. And so we need to recognize how big our influences is without even realizing it. Thanks for your attention. We'll get 15 next week and move on to chapter 4.